Hi, I noticed that it's 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I noticed that we have people coming into the webinar, and hopefully we will have people joining us throughout the webinar. And we know that we're limited for time, and we want to be able to leave as much time at the end of the webinar for questions. So I'd like to go ahead and welcome everyone on the call today for this special chance to hear from the experts in VA psychology training. Our topic today is how to get a VA internship, an hour with the experts. And I'm Monica Roy, and I'm the past chair of the VA section for Division 18, Psychologist in Public Service, and a psychologist at the VA Boston Healthcare System. I wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this event, and we should be able to have it available about 1 to 2 weeks from today. And if you have any friends who weren't able to make it today, we are actually having another event next Tuesday, October 2nd, from 12 noon Eastern Standard Time to 1 o'clock, which we'll be recording as well. Before we get started with our speakers, I'd like to take a few brief moments to mention Division 18 of APA, Psychologists in Public Service. We are co-hosting this call with the VA Psychology Training Council. Division 18 is made up of psychologists who serve in many capacities. We're represented by 6 sections of the division, including community and state hospitals, criminal justice, police and public safety, severe mental illness, Indian country, and veterans affairs. So if you're interested in working as a psychologist in public service in the future, please sign up with us. I wanted to also mention that we have a new student advisory group who works with the VA section, and they work closely with our executive committee to provide guidance on training central issues. We're also, if you're interested in joining us, please feel free to email me, and I'll put my email into the chat box. And you can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. One last note before I do the introductions of our speakers today. All questions can be entered into our chat box, and we'll be keeping track of this. We'll be waiting until the end of the presentation to be able to allow for time to answer all of these questions. But go ahead, if you have a question in mind, go ahead and put it in the chat box. So now for the introductions. I feel very fortunate to introduce a very knowledgeable panel of speakers, starting with Dr. Dana Holohan. She is the chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and the director of training at the Salem VA in Salem, Virginia. Dr. Allison Asved, she is the director of training at the VA Puget Sound Healthcare System, American Lake Division, and an APID board member. Dr. Wayne Siegel, he's the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and director of training at the Minneapolis VA. Dr. Joel Schmidt, he's also a past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and the director of training at the VA Northern California, Oakland. And Dr. Jamila Jackson, she's the member at large of the VA Psychology Training Council and the co-chair for the VA Psychology Training Council's Multicultural Diversity Committee and the director for psychology training at VA North Texas Healthcare System. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to our speakers for today.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right, so thank you, Monica, and once again I want to thank Division 18 for hosting this webinar. This has been a great thing that we've done for a few years now. It's really nice to talk to folks that are interested in training in the VA. So I'm going to take my section and then pass it on to the other folks who have some things to say as well. I wanted to start by talking about the VA as a cultural institution so that you kind of get a sense for what this is like to work here. It's a very huge government-run healthcare organization. It's also very mission-driven. So the mission of the VA includes training and research, but the principal mission is in providing healthcare to America's veterans. So to succeed here, you really have to decide that you are interested in veterans' perspectives and values. And of course, those are very heterogeneous. You know, many different veterans are very different, but there are some common themes, and that typically their service is very important to their identity and may have had both negative and positive aspects. So that's the population that we serve. A lot of times trainees have not had much interaction with veterans or military culture before coming to internship or postdoc. And sometimes trainees that are not veterans are a little bit nervous about what that's going to be like and kind of working with veterans. And I just want to say that it's going to be fine. You know, it works out really well as long as you show interest, respect, and willingness to learn. I think VA training programs are really great about providing training in military culture enough to succeed, to successfully acculturate and thrive in this environment. Also, it's important to note that we are a huge bureaucracy, and that does require some flexibility and patience. Sometimes policies don't seem to make any sense, but sometimes a surprising number of policies do turn out to be the best option for a complicated scenario. And I just say that to encourage folks who are considering training in VA that your new perspective is valuable, but it's important to offer it with some humility because things can sometimes be more complicated than they seem at first. In terms of thriving here, there's just a lot of kind of core approaches that I think are important, such as diligence, reliability, and accountability, which is probably true for any training program that you go to. But it's just really important to follow through with your clinical and education responsibilities. The other thing to remember is that you are supported by the U.S. taxpayers, and so there may be a little bit more formal accountability regarding, what we call your tour of duty than you're used to. Another thing to note is that the VA is a very highly visible organization. Americans feel very strongly about supporting veterans, but are often in disagreement about the merits of particular military actions or the role of government in healthcare. And as such, as you may have noticed in the news, the VA can sometimes be a lightning rod, and there's a heightened level of scrutiny. I guess I just want to say, if you stay focused and professional, you really don't have to worry too much about these things. And at the same time, I think watching policy play out and observing how psychology leadership advocates and develops programs in this environment can be very stimulating. It's just a good idea to give some of these factors thoughts before you come for an interview, and just be prepared to display your willingness to engage in this culture through your actions and respect. And I should just say that it's pretty typical for people to acculturate pretty quickly and then to even be surprised at how stimulating and meaningful the work is. And despite the fact that we sometimes get bad press, the VA does provide superior care in many ways and for a lower cost than the private sector. And this is particularly true in the behavioral health area. And one of the things that's good to know is that psychology really had a defining role in the building of the VA healthcare system, and so we have a long history of psychology training, and it can be really exciting to be a part of this team. So again, just an overview of some things to think about as you come into the as you consider coming into the VA for training. One other thing I wanted to talk about was just to give you a sense of how programs can be different from each other. Allison and the others will kind of talk about some similarities. But we also thought it was important that you understand that each program has its own accreditation, its policies, and training experiences. So the point is, it's really important to take a look at each program's brochure to see how specific offerings may line up with your specific interests. So one example is that there may be some variations in terms of the types of research opportunities that you have and the opportunities to provide supervision or to work on administrative projects. Those are some of the things that can differ a fair amount across facilities. So it's a good idea to just take a good look at that brochure. And as a general strategy, it's important that you know what's available at that facility when you go to interview there or talk to your training director. And it's better not to ask the training director about any activities that don't show up at all in the brochure, because of course training directors are really concerned about fit. And so if there's a lot of questions about things that are not offered at that particular program, then it's kind of raises a red flag when it comes to this issue of fit. Okay, so let me at this point pass it on to Alison Osfed and talking about some of the factors that go into discerning why you would want to come to a VA internship. And then I'm certainly happy to address questions when we get to the end.
Can everybody see me and hear me? Can someone type yes or no in the chat box? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Allison Osfed. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel with you all today. My role is to talk about what are some of the benefits of a VA internship, especially for folks who maybe haven't considered training at the VA. And so I just have a few, I think, key points that I want to highlight that I think are special strengths of the VA when it comes to psychology training. One of them actually is our funding, which compared to other healthcare organizations is fairly stable. It's set by Congress, and so the stipends for our VA internships are can be counted on for the most part in a way that some other settings folks really do have to worry about billable hours that they generate while they're trainees in order to pay for their own training position. And because our funding is stable in that way, it can make the focus on a VA internship really about training rather than service delivery. That being said, service delivery is the vehicle for a clinical internship experience. So of course, people will be seeing veterans as part of their VA internship, but that won't be the primary focus. It really will be about your learning and education. And so I think that's one key strength about VA internship training. Another thing that I think is really neat is that the VA is the largest mental health care system in our nation, and we've been able to do some very exciting things, including dissemination efforts of evidence-based psychotherapies for problems that are commonly faced by veterans. And there are a number of evidence-based psychotherapies that have been disseminated VA nationwide to date. And so folks who come and intern with us have the benefit of learning from psychologists who've been trained in those dissemination efforts, and in some cases who are leaders in those efforts. And so that's something that I think is really special about VA training. And I recall my experience coming onto staff in a VA where I had the opportunity to be trained by well-respected experts in the field in certain psychotherapies, and I was so excited about that, and it's been fun in turn to provide similar kinds of training to my trainees now that I'm a staff psychologist. So I think that's definitely a key strength. I think another thing that really stands out to me is that a VA internship can prepare you for a wide array of professional opportunities. So sometimes people think, I don't want to be a clinician, so a VA internship isn't a good fit for me because it's preparing people for clinical roles, but perhaps not research roles. And that's not true either. As you heard earlier from Joel, there's really a wide range of how much research might be emphasized in different VA settings and different VA training programs. So certainly you could be well prepared for a research or an academic career by your VA internship experience. So I think that's also a strength, that there is flexibility across VA programs. Each one of our programs is unique in some ways, and so they'll prepare you in different ways for different types of careers. And I know within my own program, we try to think about the career trajectory of the interns coming in and think about how can we design their training plan for the year to best set them up for that trajectory, whether it's to become a VA clinician or to do some other kind of professional work as a psychologist. So I think, again, that broad range of preparation that you can get for a variety of careers coming from a VA internship is the strength of training in the VA. And then I think one final point that I want to make is that I really do see working in a VA setting as an opportunity to do public service, and public service that really is social justice oriented. I think in the VA we have the opportunity to serve a variety of underserved populations, and I think whatever your politics or personal beliefs are about war, I think most people agree that taking care of veterans who are harmed by their service experience inside war zones and outside of them is really important. And sometimes we're the only network of care for the folks that we're serving. And so I think that that's really a noble and important mission. And it was one that I was surprised by on my own VA internship, and I hadn't planned on pursuing a VA career, and I ended up pursuing a VA career because of that social justice component of VA service. So I would say that's kind of a fourth key point that I'd like to highlight about why a VA internship is pretty special. And on that note, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dana.
Actually, I think I am up next. I assume that people can hear me. This is Wayne Siegel. So I want to talk about applying to a range of programs in terms of competitiveness. But in general, I think it's useful to talk about how do you decide what programs to apply to in general. I think it's useful to think about what you want to do. Um, Allison gave us some excellent ideas about why VA may be a really good choice, and certainly we agree. I trained at VA and have been here for.
Oh, hello. Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, Wayne.
Yes.
We seem to have trouble hearing you. If you go up to your microphone icon, there's a little arrow next to it. If you click down, you can adjust your volume to turn it all the way up.
Let me try.
A little bit better there?
Can you hear me now? No?
Much better. Yes.
Much better. Okay, that took a little while to come.
Yes.
Okay, I'll start again. I'll try and remember the good things that I was saying that nobody heard. So to talk about applying to a range of programs, I think it's useful to first think about how do you decide what programs to apply to. Allison gave us some really good information about why VA may be a really good choice in terms of programs, but thinking about kind of what are your interests, what position do you want to end up in later in your career, or even kind of more intermediate, what would be your next step after internship? Maybe a postdoc or something else, so giving that some thought. Your choice of internships will often have an impact on where your next step or your level may be in terms of training. So how do you learn about those choices or options? Well, the APIC directory can be a really good choice. Finding programs that match kind of your training goals, that are going to complement the skills and abilities that you want to develop through internship. They're going to make you competitive for that next level of training. Some people gravitate towards those programs that have very kind of strong national reputations, and that is great. But it's really important to think about not just does that program match in terms of what your goals and prior training is, but to think about it in terms of how competitive that program is. So the APIC directory gives really good information about the number of applications received over the past few years, and also per number of positions. So if you kind of broke that down, you can get a sense of how competitive that program is. You can also, within the APIC directory, see programs will list what doctoral programs they have obtained interns from in the past years, and see if your program is listed in there as well. If it's not, maybe it's a competitiveness issue, or maybe just that they've never had the opportunity. But at least that is information to kind of pay attention to. Talking to your directors of clinical training in terms of the reputation of programs, they have a good sense of that. They have a good sense of where other interns have gone in previous years in terms of which programs. Looking through the program websites can be extremely helpful in determining fit, and they will also give you really good information about what are they looking for in their applicants, what are their qualifications, and how well do you meet those qualifications. If it's a little bit of a stretch, maybe you're not going to be very competitive. If it's a great fit, then clearly it's good to apply to programs that may be extremely competitive or that may be considered to be a reach, but also programs where you feel you have a really strong chance of matching. So again, you want to maximize that opportunity for you to match a program. Now with that, we recommend not applying to programs that you think aren't going to be a good fit, you're not going to be very happy applying to. For applicants that are geographically restricted, where you definitely want to end up in a particular city, that adds kind of a little bit more restriction, and people may apply to more of a programs kind of a little outside their range or outside their purview. If you have questions about fit, Most training directors are happy to answer emails about that, but I would make sure that the question that you're answering isn't readily apparent through the program's website in terms of fit. So training directors often don't like questions if it's just completely obvious if you just read the website. But if there's kind of something else that's making you wonder whether you're fit or not, it would be okay to reach out to that program. And I would also, within this idea of applying to a range of programs, getting mentorship, whether it's from your director of training in your doc program or somebody else that's advising you, really look at those programs and whether that represents a good pool that you're applying to. So not just kind of relying on your own judgment, but getting experience for someone who's helped other people navigate through this before. So with that, I will turn it over to Dana.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. I was also just following up on the previous presenters, as all VAs look differently. When we're preparing for interviews, there's certainly some guidelines that are helpful for preparing for any interview, specifically at the VA, recognizing the differences between each VA and that all of us are looking to find an exceptional fit, both on the part of the applicant and on the part of the site. So familiarizing yourself with each site's published materials is really the first step, and that would be for any internship. And there are often really helpful nuggets of information in each of our brochures that tell you a lot about our priorities, what the emphasis areas are, what the site values, also about staff interests. There's also some really helpful information often about just the logistics of the interview itself and the day and how that's structured that can be really helpful in preparing for your interview, as well as information about the structure of the internship. And all of these pieces are things you want to really take into consideration as you prepare for the interview day. So knowing how many people will I be meeting with, who will I likely meet with, what's the length of the interview with each of those people, what will be the opportunities for questions throughout the day, and who would I be asking what questions of? Will I be meeting with the current intern class? What are the most important questions that I might have, and how do I prioritize those during the day? Who do I want to ask those questions to? And thinking about in particular what kinds of things you would really want to know from the current interns at the place that you would be visiting. I feel like that's a really exceptional opportunity to get important information about the site. As with any interview, you want to stay calm and be yourself. It's really important for people to get to know who you are and why you're interested in that site. As we're looking for fit, figuring out why are you applying to any VA, or why are you applying in particular to this VA. I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's important not to undersell yourself, but also to not oversell yourself. As Allison was mentioning earlier, you may be meeting with some experts in a specific treatment or field, and it's really important to share what you do know and what you've already done, while also not overstating some things as presenting as an expert on something that may be a newer experience for you. I think it's also helpful to prepare for just typical interview questions, like case conceptualization or giving a succinct and detailed answer on your dissertation, why you chose that dissertation, what you're looking at, what you found. Also, cases that you've struggled with, what you're wanting to learn from internship. There are often questions about weaknesses and strengths. I think really avoiding pat answers that could be anyone giving the answer. You really want to take advantage of the interview moment for someone to get to know what you think and how you view certain situations and cases and what your perspectives are. Having examples of challenging cases or challenging ethical experiences are helpful to prepare as well. And not to over-prepare, but to have those things in your mind so that when called up in an interview, you have some ideas of where you might want to go. You also may have multiple interviews where the same question is asked repeatedly, and thinking about how you want to handle that in advance. Do you want to give different answers, or would you like to stick to ones that you're most comfortable with? And for me, those interview questions are opportunities, my phone's going off the hook, for the interviewer to really get to know who you are, think about what matters most to you and how competent, where your areas of competence are, and you want them to know why this is a good fit for you. Also, make sure you answer the whole question. Sometimes us interviewers ask multiple components of questions that may be super confusing or feel like they go on forever. But thinking about how are you answering the whole question. And to also read the cues from the interviewer. Sometimes applicants have a hard time knowing about how much depth to go into in answers. So often you can pick up on some cues and timing that might be helpful for you as you're trying to read how much more information to share. And overall, I think all of us want to know why you want to come here in particular, so why this VA is so important to you. And if it's not clear to you whether it is a good fit, to really think about what information would you get that day that would help you figure that out. And then finally, a few small hints are just dressing professionally is very important. At the same time, making sure you're dressing in something you feel at ease in and you can feel confident in. I remember my own interview days wearing one attire that I was super uncomfortable in after I wore it and realized that I'm sure my interview did not go very well because I just was self-conscious about it the whole day. So thinking about that in advance can be really helpful. And then also if you've done a practicum at a site, sometimes that can be hard to figure out how to navigate an interview with some people that you may be familiar with. And my 2 cents are about handling it as a professional interview, not being overly familiar, and then you'll have information about what the site values, so your questions can be really focused and more advanced with someone that has less information. Also, not asking questions about things that are readily available. It's really important for us to know that you've read our materials and you're prepared for the interview, so really thinking about how you're showing that you've prepared yourself for that day. Those are my main tips. I'm going to answer questions also later, but I'm going to hand things over to Jamila Jackson.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. I'm going to try to share my camera. Can people see me? I'm not sure I'm looking at it right. Yes. Okay, great. And can you hear me okay? And we've got some more yeses. Awesome. So my name is Jamila Jackson, and I'm going to talk with you guys a little bit about diversity in the VA. One of the things that's a real strength of working in a large organization like the VA is that your program or training directors will really have the benefit of shared resources with others doing similar work around the country, and that's not necessarily something that you get if you're working in a smaller organization. And I think that shared community of resources really makes a difference in terms of making programs stronger and making sure that everybody is providing the best training that they can. So one of VA psychologists and psychology's large priorities is training in multicultural issues in psychology training. So consistent with that priority are national VA initiatives to offer support and resources for VA psychology training programs. If you're interested in diversity, VAs can be a really wonderful place to train. Sometimes there can be the stereotype that VA populations all look a particular way, but the VA serves a really diverse population in terms of age, ethnicity, ability, military, cultural issues, socioeconomic status, LGBT status, gender, all those different kinds of diversity variables. If there's a particular population that you're looking to have experiences with, more likely than not your VA psychology supervisor is able to smoke those experiences out for you, because we do see such a wide range of folks. You also have a diversity of clinical experiences as well. One of the strengths related to having that national network is that regardless of what's happening at the particular VA that you're working in, there are national initiatives that are put forth. The VA has a national diversity listserv that sends out articles once a month, and that just allows people to share resources, ask clinical questions, or I'm working with XYZ, and I'm just wondering if anybody has worked with this population before, has resources about XYZ, and so you can ask questions and you can get feedback from people all over the country, which is really, really an amazing resource. There are also quarterly diversity consultation calls that are scheduled on topics like religion and spirituality, race-based stress and trauma, cultural issues related to multidisciplinary teams, and all those types of opportunities that you'd have as well. In terms of talking about cultural factors, when you're thinking about applying to a VA internship, I'm thinking about epic essays and things like that. In addition to talking about the cultural variables related to the client or the patient that you've seen, you definitely want to also highlight cultural variables relevant to you. We all have a background and variables that impact our thinking and our perspective and all those kinds of things. So oftentimes, selecting officials are really looking for information about your level of self-awareness, your level of insight. You don't have to know everything about everything for sure, but if you can at least say what you don't know and maybe have a plan to figure that out, then that's movement in the right direction. And I think those suggestions can be used for interviews too. For many VA interviews, you'll have a question that'll be about diversity with respect to either a patient that you've worked with or maybe a professional issue that's come up. And so just kind of thinking about those things ahead of time and remembering not to fall into the trap of acting like diversity is all on the other side of the table. But remembering that you have diverse perspectives and cultural experiences as well, and bringing those into the conversation to show that you have some awareness of that. But yeah, the VA is a great place to train, and there's all kinds of diversity that's available if you were to train there. All right, I'll turn it over for questions. I think Monica is going to be modulating.
Sure. I want to thank all of our panelists for providing some information, and we are now open for questions. It looks like everyone can hear me. If you can, if someone could just type in yes, if you can. Great. I did want to note that there was a question a few minutes ago from Jeffrey, and this is specifically for Dr. Asfed. The question is, does that mean that there are changes in the targets of the internship training that are specified to the intern? Is that common across internship sites or more individualized? So Allison, this one's for you.
Sure, can you hear me? Okay, great. So I can give one example of that. So first of all, any accredited internship, any VA internship that's accredited, and we're all required to be accredited, so if we're not accredited, we're on our way. So we, of course, need to meet the standards of accreditation from APA, which include training folks to competency in the 9 profession-wide competencies, or PWCs. So you're definitely going to see that across all VA training programs, that there will be a focus on those 9 profession-wide competencies, which include things like professional attitudes, values, and behaviors, communication and interpersonal skills, intervention, assessment, science, and so on. But then I think there can be variability across programs in terms of how they do that and also how much they individually tailor that. So I'll give you an example from my program. And again, if you've seen one VA training program, you've seen one VA training program, so you do need to do your research about this. But one example is that our program has a research requirement, but we define research very broadly. So we really think about 3 different ways that someone might engage in research. There's the traditional research approach, which would be, grant funding, RCTs, large-scale projects that result in generalizable outcome data. Then we also think about implementation science, which would be looking at questions like, if we know that a particular kind of screening or intervention is the best way to treat a certain kind of problem, and yet that's not being prescribed in our healthcare system, an implementation science question would be looking at the systems level to try to understand why is it that the most evidence-based intervention or screening is not being prescribed when it looks like it should be for X number of patients, and so you might explore that. And then also we look at, quality assurance, quality improvement, QA/QI types of questions, which are more at the team or the clinic level. And so all of those things would be fine for someone to pursue on their internship here with us as part of their research project. Now, you probably couldn't do a standalone RCT in 1 year, but you could certainly carve out a smaller project that's part of a larger RCT with one of our researchers. And so what we would be doing in the internship program then is mentoring to try to understand what is the career trajectory for the individual intern. And if they want to be a clinician with a primarily clinical focus, then we would probably be encouraging them to think about a QA/QI type of research project, because that will best serve them in the career that they would like to pursue, versus someone who's considering an academic career. We would probably be encouraging them to look at more of a traditional research project that's within their area of interest, so they're preparing their CV to be competitive for that academic job that they would like to secure. So that's what I mean. Of course, that all falls under the same profession-wide competency, which is the research domain, but within that, we do, in my program, have some flexibility to tailor it to the needs of the individual trainee. So I guess the answer is it does depend, but there are ways within some programs to be flexible and individually tailor things.
Great. It looks like you've answered the question. I see Jeffrey writing back. And I think Dr. Schmidt is going to answer both questions that we have about VA experience or no VA.
Yeah, this is Joel again. And so there's two questions. One question is, if I have previous VA experience, how do I leverage that in my essays, cover letters, and interviews? And then the flip side of that is, what if I don't have VA experience? How do I demonstrate fit in the program? So I think just kind of a general rule about this, of course, is that you do want to show your interest. And so if you have previous experience in VA, obviously that's a good step in your favor, and you want to talk about that. But if you don't have experience, don't worry too much about that either. Again, I think, as I was talking about earlier, and other people have alluded to this too, what people want to see, the training directors and people reviewing your applications, is they want to see how our program fits with what you want to do. So if you haven't worked in the VA before, what you want to do is explain why, in particular, the VA that you're applying to would fit for you. And so maybe you've worked with some populations that are kind of similar. Maybe you have some other reasons why a VA career might be of interest to you because of some of the diverse experiences that have been discussed. Maybe you have a particular interest in the veteran population or specific subpopulations within the veterans that could work. So I think, it kind of all comes down to like convincing the people you're interviewing or that are reviewing your applications that this would be a good spot for you. And so, again, I think having VA experience can really help with that, but it's certainly not required. By far the most important thing is to just demonstrate why that particular program is a good fit for your next step.
Great, thank you, Joel. I see that there was a question about veteran status and how to approach that, and I see that Allison's responded. I wanted to just check with the rest of the panel to see if anyone had any other responses as well.
I would just add to Allison's response, I think that we have a number of folks that apply that are veterans that discuss that, and I wouldn't say that that's a general advice that we would give here. Certainly appropriate to speak about your experiences.
Yeah, this is Joel again. If I can just chime in, I think that might be some outdated advice, if it ever was advice. Certainly, I would say the opposite now. That generally, training programs are very interested in veterans. Many more veterans now are applying for going through graduate school, applying for internships, and I think that's pretty universal that. That's pretty interesting to selection committees, because it shows obviously a personal level of interest in our population. So I would definitely not go by that advice. And again, you still have to sell yourself on the needs of the program and how it fits with fits with your goals. But I certainly think that your veteran status should be part of your application if you have that.
This is Wayne, and we approach it as an element of individual diversity, so we like how people discuss it in that context and how what they bring to the program and that experience is different or unique.
Great. I see that there is a question here. Just lost it for a second here. From Nicole, that she's pursuing a PsyD, but noticed that there's a lot of VAs seem to match with PhD applicants. Any insights as to how someone who's a PsyD applicant can make themselves more competitive amongst their PhD applicants? Anyone from the panel?
So this is Wayne, and this is a question I get emailed about pretty frequently on our website. We do indicate that there is a preference for PhD students, but we accept applicants from PsyD students, and we have matched with PsyD students in the past. It's just about demonstrating how you're qualified for our program. We require research as a part of the component, and our model is a strong focus on empirically based practices. And so regardless of PhD or PsyD, if someone comes in with those experiences that are a good match for our program, we will give that application equally strong consideration regardless of the degree that somebody has. So it's really all about qualifications.
Great, thank you. I noticed there's another question here from Jeffrey, and this one's specifically for Dr. Jackson. Is there a level or way of discussing intersectional identities that would be most useful for the interviews?
Well, it looks like it says interviewers. Is it, do you mean interviewers or interviewees? Doria's typing. Well, one thing I would say is I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong way to talk about intersectional identities. I think when you're discussing it, you really want to highlight the role that some of these identities might play for you. So, for example, if I'm from the South, I am Southern, and so a part of the way that I conceptualize X, Y, and Z is going to contribute to my family background and kind of that regional diversity that happens there, but then there might be ethnic diversity factors that are either consistent with that or in conflict with that, or religious spirituality factors. We're all very, very complex people. So I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way to discuss it, as much as really clarifying that you're really understanding and aware of those different factors and how they impact you, how they all kind of interplay together, if that makes sense.
Okay. I see there's another question from Elizabeth. As a female clinician, I'm wondering how the VA deals with sexual microaggressions in the workplace.
This is Allison. Can you all hear me? Just yes or no in the chat box would help me out. Yes. Okay. So I would say in our internship program, it's definitely something that we talk about, microaggressions in general, and also microaggressions related to gender and gender presentation. And I think it's something that more of my female colleagues have probably experienced, and female trainees, but I think anybody certainly can experience unwelcome comments that maybe the impact doesn't match the intent, right? So that is typically what is the case, that we might be working with a patient who says something and they're not meaning to be hostile, it's benevolent, but the impact of the comment does feel harmful. And so that's what we kind of focus on, and how do we help folks to give some of that feedback in a way that also manages rapport within the clinical interaction. And I think it's unfortunate that we have to be sometimes thinking about managing rapport when we might have just experienced something that is sexual harassment, right? But I think for most of us in many settings that happens. And so what we want to do is, rather than pretend like it doesn't happen, we want to acknowledge that it does and prepare people to have those difficult conversations. And of course, if something rises to the level of sexual harassment, we don't want anybody to be harmed in our training environments, and there's lots of protections put in place in the VA as a federal institution that we can do around that. But I'm talking more on that microaggression where the impact and intent are mismatched. And at that level, we just help talk about it in supervision and didactic and in other areas. We also have diversity mentoring programs, and that can be a rich place for those discussions too.
Great. So the next question is from Candace about research experience and not having as much research experience and going into the application process, and will that hurt an application, or is that something that she or others can express as a desire to gain from the internship?
This is Dana. Can you all hear me?
Hi, this is Joel. I'm happy to take a shot at this one. So again, it really goes back to what we've talked about quite a bit, which is fit, and the that some programs are going to be very research focused, as kind of Wayne was talking about, and that's going to be a little bit harder to make the pitch. But on the other hand, there's other programs that really don't have that as an emphasis. So it's really hard to have one answer for the VA, and I think it's better to just look at each program. And in terms of wanting to gain research experience on internship, it's again really important to take a look at particular programs and make sure that they do offer that. You don't want to ask for it if they don't offer it. So just a couple points that I'd make there.
Great, and I think, Dana, your microphone was off. Was there anything else you'd wanted to add?
Yeah, I was in agreement with Joel. I think also thinking about, even if you haven't done a lot of research, maybe speaking to what you do know and addressing what you are most interested in and what your expertise is in. So even if you haven't published 4 papers or something along those lines, really being able to speak articulately about the literature that you use to inform your evidence-based practice, like thinking about how you might be able to speak to that in your interview.
Great, thank you. And I see another question from Ashley, stating that she heard from mentors that certain VA internships value previous VA practicum experiences more so than others. Is this the case, and if so, any advice on how to determine this?
So this is Allison. I'm happy to jump in. I think one way you can determine if a VA practicum experience is important is through the published materials. So the published materials from any of our VA training sites should have a section that talks about what are the minimum qualifications for a program, and then what are additional factors that we look at when we're reviewing applications. And so if a VA practicum experience really is a requirement, then it should say so there. And if it's not a requirement, if it's something that we have a preference for at the site level, then it should say that there as well. And at least within my program, it's not so much the VA experience specifically, but it's the adult mental health experience with complex and underserved patients that we're looking for, which could be ascertained, in other public service environments that are not VA or military. So we're just going to look for those similar experiences. And so if you don't have the VA experience, I would provide you the guidance that you should write about the similar experiences that you have working with complicated adults who have a lot going on, because that's a lot of times what we see in our veteran population.
And this is Joel again. If I could just build, I completely agree with what Allison said, but I just wanted to add too that this is an anxiety-provoking process, I know, applying for internship, but there is kind of a risk of overthinking things a little bit. And I'm just referring to not only this question, but also the question about PhD versus PsyD. And I can say, for myself and having talked to a lot of training directors, I think it's typical that we tend to look for the whole picture. And so there aren't as many of these kind of rule-out single issue variables that you might think there are. So I think whatever your background is, whatever you've prepared for, if you take a good look at a given program's brochure and you feel like you can make a good case for why that's a good fit for you, I would encourage you to apply. Again, there are maybe a few things, but generally speaking, I think that training programs tend to be a little bit more holistic about these things than it might appear. So I wouldn't stress too much about if you don't have certain things, as long as, you can take a look at the specifics, what are they asking for, and can you make a pretty decent case that you've got the preparation they're asking for, and that you have can make a good case for why you fit.
Okay, I see a question from Dory. She wrote here, it seems that most VA internships focus on adult mental health treatment. I've seen some brochures that mention opportunities for training in family therapy. Just curious to hear more about what opportunities there might be to work with veterans and their families. And then someone added, Emily added to the bottom of that, working with couples. So working with families, veterans, their families, and couples.
Okay, this is Allison again. Since no one's chiming in, just type yes in the chat box so I know people can hear me. Perfect. Okay, so there certainly are VAs that have couple and family services. I would say there may be some really cool, innovative programs and perhaps consortium that would have more focus on working with children. That's pretty rare in a traditional VA setting. I'm sure there are some exceptions to that, so I'm sure it exists. But most of the time, speaking in generalities, if you're looking for experiences with couples and families within the VA, it's going to be the veteran and as the identified client or patient, and then a significant other, likely a spouse or romantic partner. So more couples, and then some family work with the focus.
Oh, I think we've lost Allison for a moment. We have seemed to have lost Allison, so I'm going to try to work on this behind the scenes. Would anyone else like to jump in and answer the question?
This is Joel. I think Allison did a pretty good job of answering the question, and that, basically as a summary, it's pretty rare to have much experience with families that include children. But we do have, seems like a fair amount of couples therapy, but again, depending on the program, some places have it, some places don't. And then a lot of times family therapy in the VA involves dealing with caregivers. So it can be elderly veterans, or it could be people with different forms of disabilities or things like that, and their caregivers. So that's a lot of times the kind of family interactions that occur that you might work with in a clinical setting in VA.
I know Monica's working on fixing the microphone, so I'm going to try to help with the question if that's okay, if folks can hear me. I see a question from William. If gaining experience is a goal for the internship year, but coming from a scientist practitioner model and applying for a program described as a practitioner scholar model, how would I negotiate that in my essays or cover letter? I can take a stab at answering that. I think it's important to make a genuine argument about why you see, and if you're making a switch in some ways or trying to elaborate on things that you feel like have been relative areas that have not been a focus, it's really important for you to tell that story in your cover letter about and take advantage of the cover letter. I often read cover letters that haven't taken advantage of. You have an opportunity for a page and a half to speak to what you want people to know about you. And so for me, that's an opportunity where it would be really helpful for the person to say, hey, this is what my emphasis has been, but in particular, this is why I'm applying here. I really want during internship year to highlight these specific things, and I think my background will make me competitive for these things. And during this year, this is the most important priority for me. I think when people make that argument, you're allowing the reader to see that rather than us coming up with our own conclusions about why you're applying there.
Yeah, this is Wayne. If I could add to that, those models really aren't used very much anymore, and people don't really know what they mean. So by whether the internship says it's scientist practitioner or practitioner scholar, so you'd really want to find out, what does the training look like? Is research involved in that? Or probably more important in terms of fit is the training and clinical work really focused on empirically based practices? Is that really an emphasis or strength of the program coming from a clinical science or a scientist practitioner model? That's probably important to people, and if it wasn't what the program had to offer, it would really be a poor fit. And then it would be not a great experience for you, the intern, or the program. And so really figuring out what that training is regardless of what the model says, is what I would recommend.
And this is Joel again. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, this is Jamila. I was just going to add that, kind of along the lines of what others have said, I think it's important to really be genuine about finding that goodness of fit. There can be a lot of pressure and anxiety of, I need to find an internship, or I need to rank or apply to many places. But I think really being thoughtful about the program's requirements and how much that does match with your experiences, or it could be that you don't have the experience in that area, but you do have some of the base skills that would be associated with some of the things that they're offering there. And so that's something that you can really play up in your professional statement and in your cover letter as well. That even though you don't have X, Y, and Z experience, that you've had other experiences that are consistent with the same types of skills that are utilized then.
And this is Joel again. I just wanted to kind of build on things that everyone said, but particularly something that Dana said I think is super important. I just want to emphasize. Really put some time into your cover letter, because if you think about it, the application is about 50 pages, and the only thing that's unique for each site is that cover letter, and that's the place that you have to sell your fit. So when it comes down to any of these questions about how do I kind of market this or market that, or how do I kind of sell myself on this, that's the place to do it. So really put your time into that cover letter. You're preparing everything else in a general way for all the programs. The cover letter is the thing you're writing to each place. I just want to really emphasize that because I think it's super important.
So I think we've come to the end of the hour. And so we will be losing the room in about a minute. So I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank our panelists and for all the great information, and thank everyone who attended. And I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that there is a link for on the agenda slide, and this is for more information about psychology training. Please also feel free to email me at monica.roy@va.gov if there's any more questions, and I can forward your questions to our panelists. And thank you all. And again, we have recorded this event, and it should be available in 1 to 2 weeks on the Division 18 VA Section APA website. Thank you very much.